TL, the arcane good. Next on next on players like how I'm a reboot player. The regular server suggestions may be less good, but I still believe just from it to scenarios of some might be relevant. President probably most conversion model like the end of the frenzy totem. The problem is that those that have a super expensive, super exclusive money could take advantage of the entire rest of the player base by selling frenzy service at rates where you literally have to lose money to gain feasible amounts of experience, to my understandings. Possible solutions to the difference between having a frenzy totem and non remains the same, while also simultaneously making the frenzy-less experience better. We just slightly increase either the base spawn timer or base mob count. Leave the multiplier provided by the frenzy totem the same. Frenzy totem itself and totem service would still be equally as valuable, but players that do not have the totem or do not have them as a... How can you ever find a line, though, where people who feel like it's unfair because they have more that they would ever be okay with, that is not at exactly the same line as people who have it? That would be so hard to find that line, though. It'd be cool if you could do that, but I don't know if you could ever find where that limit lies. No, since the reboot players are already time gated by the progression, probably just adding to stores, right? Same reason why fair rate cannot be figured to add those ones to a general store. Yeah, we've been saying that for years. That's obviously something they could do with maybe some limit on it. I'm already expecting / hoping that New Age will bring that. And then if we know that it's coming in 6 months, we probably won't bother with it at all for GMS. Rate can easily decrease the player progresses throughout the different arcane river areas so that each general... I think what would make more sense is to just have more dailies. Maybe even have all the dailies in Arcane River to give extra node stones, for completing it several times a week, just like the Vanishing Journey ones have now. But Vanishing Journey, they added the 3 because they lowered the drop rate in just Vanishing Journey, because people in Korea used to farm there for nodes, so they lowered the drop rate there. But I feel like it would make sense if all the dailies just had that. And especially for the first characters, some extra nodes in the guide for reaching certain levels would... something I said before the Maple guide got switched to this. It would be cool if they added that. Each general store has a decreasing price for node stones. Each general store has a decreasing price for node stones. Oh, as you go higher in the areas. The problem with node stones is that you kind of don't... It's kind of like with symbols. In the beginning, they're valuable because they level up your stuff, but in the end, they're valuable because they save you more days. So they kind of maintain their same value even when they're very individually very valuable because of how the system works. So I don't know how that would go with that. I'd have to think about that. The amount of node stones can even still be time capped, where you can only buy X a day, and you can, of course, obviously a 285 AK plus Legion player has all their nodes and all their mules nodes maxed. That's not necessarily true, because depending on how many mules you have, that can be literally tens of thousands of nodes. And that's not even obvious, I would say. I wouldn't be able to max all my nodes on all of my mules, and I have a 280 and a 277. Maybe a 285, that's a decent amount of extra levels, but even then, if you keep increasing your bar to how strong you want everything upgraded, that's a lot of nodes, man. Somebody who farmed back in the day definitely will, though. Somebody who had like a farming Kana back on the side, who's now 285, definitely will, for sure. Maybe the MapleStory is not the most friendly game for new players. Friendly players also, new players also try to like speedrun the game without any patience. And the reason that nodes are so scarce is because they are so valuable. And they're also, even though I've called this like the the node stone, what's the word I'm looking for? Where it's like a contradiction. The paradox, right? Kind of like a node stone paradox, where people feel like node stones are more rare just because we have more skills to level up. But because you have more skills to level up, you actually need fewer node stones because you're already getting more base damage from having more skills. So people feel like nodes are now more rare because there's more places for them to go. But in reality, it's just one of the systems that needs a little bit of time. But it comes down to the age-old thing. Like, if you were to get like a crazy amount of them and you can max everything out super quickly, would that be, if the general player base would like it, then it's probably better to do a little bit more. But if you do too much, then you upset the balance of the game, and then people progress too quickly, which players think they just want to progress more quickly. But in reality, if players progress too quickly, they just get bored faster, and then they leave the game, which for the player might be okay, but for the game isn't okay, because they want people to stay around and make money off of them, right? So you'll always have to strike that balance between making players feel like they're progressing fast, which is difficult because the concept fast could only really mean something in relation to something else, right? Speed is something that you can only measure between two things. One thing does not have a speed by itself, right? So that's going to be a tricky balance to strike. Which interesting, XP curve, symbol daily, star force, and cubing on the horizon is not so change will just be an additional source of power creeping and allow players. I think if there's anything like 6-jobby thing in New Age coming, that there will definitely be nodes available somewhere extra to make sure that people start getting pushed through 5th job faster, so they can make their way towards 6th job faster. I think that's inevitable. It might just be still a little bit too early now. And I know that early feels weird for people who have been around the whole time and basically been playing 5th job for 7 years. But there is a lot of time in between these huge jumps. But it will come. This is like a matter of time, I think, not like a matter of if, matter of when. Familiars have familiars to grandest and revamp the familiar system so that it's easier to acquire desired familiars, whether that's removing junk lines or accelerating the epic. Assuming that there's no logical reason you should feel almost obligated to sacrifice experience gain to be able to farm familiars. Well, I mean, there is. You play more, right? If you play more, then they can increase the amount of player hours on average, and they can keep people in certain areas, and they just make it so that you play more, That's a really, really good reason. The game can make you to play the game longer. That's what they want, right? They want you to play longer. Not to say that that's good or anything, but you're saying there's no reason when there is actually the most important reason is right there. Players that aren't lucky few that get all of their most of their familiars before they would normally transition to grandest are at an overwhelming disadvantage. I wouldn't say it's overwhelming, but they're at a disadvantage for sure. When many upgrade systems MapleStory are dependent on RNG and luck, the farming of Meso or for more star forcing and cubing does not require you to backtrack your character in terms of experience progression. I mean, I would say the system is definitely not good, but this is just a bunch of suggestions of it needs to be better because better is better. The argument of there's no good reason to make us play more, that's a weak argument, right? There are definitely good arguments to make here. The backtracking is a stronger one. But I think there should be a valid, system in the game where it's you can choose to try to work more on your damage and then sacrifice your EXP, or you can go harder on the EXP but then sacrifice your gains in damage. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, and in fact I think that's a good thing. But of course, people want to eat their cake and have it too, so you'll never have players who want to go for endgame as soon as possible. They'll never really openly say that, right? Because that's, yeah. It is hard though, and of course I've already said this, it is hard to value something that someone has, especially in GMS Reboot, because you can never really know how much effort it took, Someone has a 22 pitched, I want to be able to be happy for them. But that could have been their second run that they just lucked into, and they could have just tapped it and lucked out. Or it could have been someone who's been running that boss for 4 years straight soloing, and that's the 7th drop that they got, and it finally went to 22, right? Ultimately, those items look exactly the same, but they are not the same, right? And to that person that got them, they are not. They're completely different items, and that's always my problem. So some kind of pity system or some kind of making the symbols and all that stuff. Sorry, not the symbols, but the rates, having a pity system, the familiars having some kind of extra pity system. I would be okay for that, just to kind of make it so that when you see an item, you can know to a certain level what is that item worth and how much effort was that item. There's always going to be some variance, but I feel like that's a stronger argument than why do you make us play more, right? Because that's a very easy answer, because they want you to play more, and that's their whole goal. On fact pads there exist, but yeah, I think there should be there should be familiars on the higher areas. Even if it's at a lower, even if it's at the same rate, we will still be getting familiars very slowly because you'll need to focus on damage gear over drop rate gear. So you'll get very few familiars anyway, but it'll be something as a consolation prize. And I think, I don't know right now, but I think because Limina is still a bottleneck, it should follow that familiars come to the higher level areas to be able to push people away from staying in Limina forever. Because people are actually training around those levels, or they're fighting with people who are just farming familiars, which is not a good situation to be in. But we've always had this, right? We've had like the bottleneck at Bye Bye Station, we had the bottleneck at Arcana, or the bottleneck at kind of like at Lachaline first, then at Arcana, and then kind of in Moonbridge, and now in Limina. There's always going to be something that's the most bottleneck, but so I hope that they eventually push people through, but probably for different reasons than that. On Vagpets there exist generic 90-day pets, and there exist permanent pet events such as Wonderberry, which is not worth, by the way. It's a very bad financial decision to go for perma pets. I understand why Vagpets can be similar in the way that there's a constant method to obtain them. You don't understand? Well, let me tell you. That's because artificial scarcity. If you have something that's always available, then people won't feel the need to really get it because it's always available. It's always there. If you get it to just be temporarily available for only like a few weeks and it might never come back, people will panic buy even if it's not in their best interest and so to buy it. Again, that's not a good reason. That's not a positive reason. I don't think it should be like that. But that doesn't deny the fact that there is a reason for that. And again, that's one in favor of the game and definitely in disfavor for the player base. So I understand. Again, agree with the gist of why you're asking the question. But there is a very easy answer to that question on why it is the way that it is. Not that that's positive. Again. Even if they were made more expensive and more temporary. More expensive and more temporary. Well, I mean, if they were more temporary, that would make them more expensive. And if they were more expensive for the same duration, that would make them buy, like mathematically would make them more temporary, right? Like more money for the same time. If you do both, then that would be exponential increase. Next, we have more players spending money in the cash up. That's always hard to say. It's very hard to say. It's like, what if we just made all the items in the cash up 10% cheaper? Would that mean that they make more money or less money? If an item is cheaper, some people who would have already bought it would still buy it, but they might buy more items now. If an item is cheaper, some people who wouldn't buy an item at all, they might buy it now, but they might still not buy it because they're just not interested in spending money. It's very hard to say what is the exact, it's always like the supply and demand curve, right? It's very easy to say, like, if you just change this, then that will happen. You can think that will happen, but will it actually, right? It's very tricky. Even in like basic economics, you got your supply and demand curve, and it's like, oh, if demand increases, price drops, and if supply or demand increases, hang on, which ones am I looking at? But like if the price drops, then demand will increase, right? If the price increases, demand will drop. But by how much? And is it like perfectly elastic? And is it perfectly linear? Like all of that. There's a whole bunch of ifs, ands, and buts. It's nice to see it in theory, but what will happen in reality is difficult to say. I think fact pets being expensive as they are is a good thing for the fact of pay to win. I feel that pay to win really comes into play when the prices of items are basically mocking you, as if you're like, if you're not buying this, then you're just a dumbass because there's such a steal. And within that, basically forcing you to spend money that you might not want to spend. And then because most people around you will, then I think you feel like it's pay to win. If something is just so prohibitively expensive, I feel like it's easier, like the fact pet being like $100, like triple digit dollars, up down to 70 with reward points, all of that. You can much more easily say like, yeah, it's beneficial, but it's so expensive that if somebody is willing to shell out that kind of money, they deserve that advantage, and I don't care because it's just too much money. There is always like a price where I think that happens, and I think with the fact that it's being that expensive and being only limited availability, I think that's a good price point for them, that people can rationalize not buying them, and that a lot of people who play a lot can rationalize buying them. But if it was too much, if it was even more expensive, I feel like people would just see it as an insult, like, oh wow, pets are just garbage, and you want to get pets to work the way that they actually should, and you have to pay this much money for it, fuck this game. Or if they're too much cheaper, then it'll come into the range where people are like, fuck, I can't afford this, and I do play the game a decent amount, but now the game is basically asking me to pay like $50 up front and then $15 a month, and to keep that up, just to get like a huge advantage that I can actually afford, and now it feels like crazy pay to win is being forced upon me, right? Like I don't have decision over my own finances, now the game is basically spoon feeding it to me. So I think for those reasons, I think it is positioned decently well. But yeah, making it more available could be beneficial for everyone. It could actually end up in more sales and more people feeling better about it, but it could also do the opposite. I could see both things happening. It's really hard to predict that. General clarity on communication. The entire jet deletion scenario to create requests and many other situations resolving the player base desiring communication from Nexon are just totally unacceptable. They are. I don't understand how someone who plays in non-reboot spends any money on this game. We don't know what is exactly 100% affected by drop rate. They say that we know, but I don't trust it anymore at this point. We don't know to which extent drop rate affects the items that it does. We don't really know exactly the rate of rolling drop rate on cubes. We don't know exactly the rate of tiering up with those cubes, but still those cubes cost real money and are accessible to miners in a country like the US. I feel like that's 6 laws that are at least being violated there, and I don't understand how the game still operates and is up in that way in the US. I don't understand any of that. And I don't understand how people can just keep swiping their credit card and just like it's just pure cope. I feel so 100%, 3,000 million percent on that train. I don't get it. The jet deletion, the totem removal, these are things that feel like they're just getting spliced in between other decisions and just kind of like piled on and just kind of get thrown onto us. The jet deletion, yeah, of course we have a lot of time until it actually happens, which I think it's better to know that it's going to happen further in advance than to know, like with the totems, like, oh, by the way, they're gone tomorrow. Especially since the totem deletion came when there was already announced that certain things were being removed in the preview, and then like 5 days after that, oh, by the way, totems also. And it's like, whoa, you could told us about the other ones that we didn't really care about, and then something as huge as totems you could just dump on us the day before, right? That showed very clearly that like the the order of who tells who what to do, it feels like it was like a financial decision somewhere that just kind of got squeezed in hierarchically and just got top down, thrown in there. That didn't feel organic or very thought through, or considering the consequences, that kind of thing. We don't need complete transparency, and we'll never get that, and I don't think anyone is realistically asking for that, but there needs to be some sort of compromise, 100%. For sure. Whether it's expanding the ability of community managers actually communicate potential changes or reevaluation of current communication strategies, something has to be done. I mean, the problem is just being stuck between a rock and a hard place. I'm sure that the people who are working at Nexon NA want to do a lot of stuff, but I'm pretty sure they just have their hands tied with Korea being able to, like, on the dime, just throw things down at them, like, do this, and they'll have to do it immediately. And if they really, the more you communicate and the more you are open about things that are changing, the more you set expectations of those things definitely coming and other things definitely not coming, and the more upset a community can actually be when unforeseen things happen. It's an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk, especially if you don't have full control over your product, right? If GMS was the be-all, end-all and could make those decisions, they could be way more upfront and way more flexible and way more open with their communication, right? But since someone else holds the final reins, it's incredibly difficult to do that. But the way that they communicate certain things, like saying we fixed the flames for transposing, that just makes everyone lose trust. Because what do you mean fix? It's been like that for 7 years, or how long? For as long as Reboot has existed, that's been possible, right? Or since we had flames, I guess. Sorry, we didn't have flames the whole time, but since we had flames, that's something that's happened. That's been one of the, again, many people think that's the one reason why we transposed. It's definitely not. It was one of the nice little bonuses of transposing. But it was super well known as like that's the thing that just transposing does. But that's another thing, right? They never told us like, hey, this is transposing, this is what it's supposed to do, and then didn't include the flames, because then it could have been like reported as a bug and it could have been fixed right there and then. But if it's just kind of just like thrown onto us, because Nexon doesn't even know how it's supposed to work, and then 6 years later or whatever, 4 years later, it's a fix. And it's like, well, how is it a fix? Just call it what it is then, and just say like, oh, we saw that transposed items are a little bit stronger than we anticipated. So in order to figure out that balance, we're making it so that when transposing, the flame doesn't carry over anymore. I mean, that wouldn't have gone. People would have still not like that, but at least it would make sense for that decision, because it's not like you didn't know for years that was a thing. So. Singapore removed in an unscheduled emergency maintenance without explanation. Well, I think that has more to do with the things that Mist has been talking about, with like the Insider and Nexon and stuff, where it's like you just have a different team that is now managing a different product, and you have to just make certain different decisions based on how heavy the game is to run, what kind of areas you have access to, what kind of implications for the balance they have, and where you want to go with the future of your game. And you're always going to be like readjusting what you give the players access to. And it's inevitable that some areas, so especially areas that are either dead or that don't do what you want to do or do what you don't want it to do, and or that interfere with other ways of patching and slow down your game development, those areas are always going to be like in the danger zone, and they just need like one crucial thing for it to go wrong there, or you just need someone to be like, fuck this thing, and just get rid of it, right? That's why I see Commercy on the way out, not necessarily because I don't think it interferes with the game code that much, because fewer and fewer people are playing it and are in Commercy. Even though it's such a great area in terms of like character progression, but because people are not going to be there as much anymore, especially now that they think transposing is that, because some content creator said that somewhere, because the flame doesn't carry it over anymore. So I guess losing like 70 flame score or something means that getting 22 star way more guaranteed than you can get 19 on other items means somehow that that you don't do it anymore, I guess. That's that brings it closer, I think, into the red zone, where it could be in danger of like getting axed, especially if it's something that does something that they might not want it to do. And in that sense, them cutting the flame might actually have been a really good thing, because that might have taken it a little bit out of the danger zone and a little bit less on the radar of KMS as possible danger area that upsets the balance, and as a result we can keep it for longer, right? So even though it seems like a negative, it could be like a negative, a fix hidden as a positive, in the sense that it could make it so that we keep the content longer and then can benefit from star forcing for longer, But yeah, I mean, communication has been a problem for so fucking long. And they say we'll do the beam brigades and we'll do this and we'll do that. The beam bulletins, sorry. And then with and then we have a few bulletins, and then they're like on point and they're kind of good. And then suddenly we don't have one for a year, and it's like, oh, yeah, I don't know. It's easy for us to say like, just tell us more. But they're probably thinking like, dude, we want to tell them everything, but like we're not allowed to, and it wouldn't be good, Because even because we're getting the roadmaps now, which is a lot more communication, right? But to us, it doesn't feel like a lot more communication, because we already can see what KMS is doing, and the roadmap is like a 95% copy of that, and then a few other events here and there, and that's basically it. But even on all of the roadmaps is like, this is just a preliminary, general planning thing that we have. Everything is still subject to change. Everything could still be moved around. around, like nothing is set in stone, you know. They're trying to be so careful because they know they have a player base, Western player base of people who are very planning ahead and planning for long term and are very dependent on certain events coming, even if they didn't announce them yet. Or like, when is this going to be announced? Like, who said there is going to be one? Well, you had one last year around this time, so there should be one now, right? And yeah, so I always try to be very careful with people. Like, oh, when is the next cube sale? We don't know. We'll know it when we know it. Keep your eyes out on Wednesdays for the cash up updates on the website, and if there's a cube sale in there, then you know we'll get one. And other people might say like, oh, there's definitely going to be one in July. Good luck with that. You could be right, but you could also be horribly wrong, and then a whole bunch of people who've been counting on it are now, you know, end up being betrayed, or not betrayed, but, you know, disappointed at that. But it's expanding the ability of community managers, potential changes, reevaluation current communication strategy, something has to be done. Very true. Yeah, if the bugs surrounding Jet were too game breaking and were beyond fixable, I'm sure that this was known within Nexon for months, and I see no reason why the possibility for removal and some brief explanation couldn't have been given months ago, rather than with deleting an entire class. Here's compensation in patch notes. Again, I don't feel like that's a really good point, because they actually gave us the notification that it's happening like almost 10 months ahead of time. Yeah, basically 10 months before they're going to do it. You might be looking for, we're thinking of doing this. I don't know why you want. I don't understand this point, I guess. You wanted it 13 months ahead instead of 10 months ahead of time? I don't know what that would have changed, personally. And I also don't think you want to overestimate how much in advance certain decisions are made in Nexon. I'm pretty sure some events are just being thrown in like a week ahead of time because they already have them lying around and because they want to fill out the content a bit more. And there's only like, I think it's only like the anniversary events, maybe Christmas events, and then the summer and winter that are ahead of time, like 6 months to a year ahead of time. And everything else, I think, just gets thrown in like a month or two ahead of time, I think. I don't know what 12 or 13 months of announcement for jet removal instead of 10 would have really done. I think the response for the community would have been the same, personally. But maybe I'm wrong on that. I could be wrong on that. 5B. Oh, just extra communication part. On other class bugs, Blaster's bugs surrounding after image shock in conjunction with Walker Punch has been not only replicated, but players also know how to avoid it. I'm not a computer science or coding expert, considering the reasoning for the bug and how to avoid it have been figured out. I generally don't understand how it has been not fixed. Other bugs like the bug of C-Wave. I think if you knew anything about computer code and you got to look inside MapleStory's code, I think you would run away screaming, personally. And that's me not knowing anything about coding either. But I think if you are like bushy-eyed, like getting just out of computer science bachelor's and shit, and your first job is working at Nexon and you get to see the code, I think you never want to do anything with coding anymore in your life. That's what I imagine the shock and horror would be in there. But there are definitely some character classes that are... Is this something... I don't know if anyone is Blaster, but is this also something that is not yet fixed in Korea? Because that's a KMS class, right? But yeah, that sounds really bad. It sounds like that's something that should be addressed, yeah. It's actually cool if there is a workaround. I mean, it might be shitty, but I know for a while that Hayato's tended to get bugs over and over, and then the workarounds were basically just don't use some of your most powerful skills, and it's like, well, okay, thank you for killing my class until it hopefully gets fixed in a few months. I mean, the bigger what the fuck is going on is, of course, the cache up crashing people the whole time, right? And that's something that they just can't seem to figure out what is doing that exactly. Other bugs like the bug of C-Wave with Thunderbreaker since the momentary event started are just met with the same copy-paste response on multiple occasions. There's a difference. There's a C-Wave problem with Thunderbreakers? Oh, I hadn't heard of that either. Yeah, that sucks. Yeah, they just... I mean, I imagine they just sent... If they get enough error reports, they just send it to Korea, and then it goes on the stack somewhere in Korea, and then some dev gets it when he gets to it. It's not a good system. There's a difference between following a script and literally copy and pasting one, and it's yet another example of the gap in communication between player base and the staff. This sounds more about how GMs in for tickets are responding to it, right? Which, yeah, I mean, GMs a lot of times are just they've got their flow chart, and then they can just do what they can do. The best thing you can do as a player is to report as many things as you're allowed to without getting banned from support. The more you have certain things being reported, the more the GMs will let the team know, like, this is a big problem. A lot of people are having this issue, and it's a serious issue. And then the higher it will end up being on the stack, and the higher priority it will get with the developer in Korea who's going to be tasked with like fixing it, right? So as much as it disheartening it can be that you have to, as the player, you have to decide what gets fixed first. It's just if something gets more reports and something gets complained about more often in tickets, and more tickets are there, the team is more likely to make tools for the GMs to actually get it fixed, possibly ahead of time. In terms of like getting items back when you accidentally NPC them or extract them or something like that. Years ago, you would never get anything back. You just get a good luck, go fuck yourself kind of thing. But now, for a lot of people, they do get items back. Why? Because a lot of people had that issue. A lot of people made tickets. A lot of people complained, and people in the team saw like, oh, there is a tool that we could make to at least give them something back, and a lot of people wanted, so they were able to implement that, right? So some things will only just happen if you brute force them as a community. What do you think about hyperprinting a bug main for safer update? Also, a safer update June 14th, and good pick, yeah. This post is not a call for boycott or any major measures, and also don't claim to be the expert of all things. Who is? I mean, even Nexon isn't an expert of MapleStory, right? Solutions may be far from perfect, and some may claim these problems aren't problems to begin with, but that's the beauty of humanity. You're entitled to your opinions. I love that last part. Like, everyone has their own opinions. It's totally in your right to be completely wrong. I agree. Was it see progress if not on these fonts, on others illustrated somewhere by the community? I feel like it should be. Yeah, the fact that we don't have a monitoring system, we didn't get that when Korea got theirs. It's like, do we have to boycott harder? I mean, in Korea, they had a huge amount of their player base that just jumped ship and just went to, what was it, Lost Ark, right? So they had to scramble to give people a whole bunch of stuff to regain people's trust and to give them a lot of bonuses to get the player base back. I mean, well, in GMS, everyone saw just what was going on and was eating popcorn and just holding out their hand for compensation. It's like, well, I'll have whatever they're having, you know? It's a completely different vibe. Like, why do we not have cube tier up rates and cube roll rates, like official ones? I don't know. It's been mentioned so many times. It's got to exist in the code somewhere, right? It's got to be just one smart guy who can just like pick it out of the code and just fucking put it on a website, I feel. Did I miss some subs? What happens? Kabouter and Keith, thank you very much for the resubs, guys. Appreciate it. It's hard I mean, the main thing is like the communication and how long ahead of time we hear things, and I don't know, like the reasons for things just feel bullshit so many times, and then a lot of people just lose trust, because even if they do hear something, they're like, yeah, right, you know? How are you going to regain that? Is it even regainable? If it's not regainable, then, you know, how much effort would you really put in it? Seems like they've just kind of given up on that part. But yeah, if there is like a specific class bug like this, everyone who plays that class all has to make a ticket, all has to report it, maybe report it like once every week that it's not done or something, and just overload the ticketing system with it. The GMs and the people who do support actually want this. They want you to report all these things so they can have a clear line of problems and send that through to the team, because the more of a thing they have, the more they can also push that, because they also want the game to be fixed, right? They also want people to not have issues. That's their fucking job, to fix issues for people. And if they can do that, they're happy with that, except for like Crindex or whoever the fuck it is, right? Like I just is power trip. But that's what those people want as well. And yeah, I know it might feel shitty that you need to do people's work for them, but game is huge. There's a billion things wrong with it. Someone has to help them prioritize it. You know, what is more important and what is affecting more people. And sometimes the reality also is, if you're reporting a thing that's a problem with your game, and you feel like for you it's like, you know, a top 3 problem, but if only 100 people out of 10,000 people in the game agree with you, then it just overall isn't enough of a priority to deal with. And that can suck, that realization, but that is sometimes what it ends up being. But if it's a crucial error and it really like fucks with your character's mobbing or bossing or something, you should definitely go after that and report it. I don't play the class myself, so but you know, I'll put it up I'll put in a good word, okay? But yeah, so, you know, a few good things here, a few things I think that could be improved in terms of like arguments for it, and a few questions that seem to underpin the entire negative point. I feel like have very good answers, like why would you make us play more? Because that's what they want. You know, both for the totems and for the familiars. Again, not things I agree with, but answers to those questions nonetheless. But yeah, let me know what you guys think.